Hello! So today I'm going to be talking about The Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons, the sequel to Hyperion. As always, when it comes to reviewing a sequel, I am going to be saying things that might spoil aspects of the first novel, so you've been warned. However, I will be keeping a review of this novel as spoiler-free as possible. The Fall of Hyperion picks up directly after the events of Hyperion, as we are following the 7 pilgrims as they journey to the time tombs on Hyperion. That's a lot of Hyperions. We kind of get a similar structure to the first novel in which we are following these interconnected stories. However, in this novel, they spend a lot more time together or in pairs. It's not these sort of solo individual stories that we get. But as the novel progresses and they do go off on their own, we do start following them on their own little journey throughout Hyperion, throughout the time tombs and their interactions with the Shrike. All of these stories are also sort of narrated from this really interesting device that's used, involving a side character from one of the stories in the first novel. But I can't really say much more about this side character or how we're getting this narrative voice without spoilers, so I'll just sort of leave that there. However, it's really important to know that in this novel we are not getting that Canterbury Tales structure in which we get individual stories from each of the pilgrims as they progress on their journey. No, this is much more set in the present and we're following them in the now. Whilst the first novel was very different in its approach to hard science fiction, it's one of the things I absolutely adored about it, I will say that The Fall of Hyperion falls into a much more traditional approach to science fiction. Now that's not a bad thing, but it is worth noting that you are going to feel that difference. The Shrike, an enigmatic and lethal creature that is tied to the time tombs, features a lot more heavily in this novel. We spend a lot more time with the Shrike, and we also get a little bit more of an in-depth exploration onto the Shrike's purpose and origins. A much bigger part of this novel follows the impending war between the hegemony of man and the ousters. We spend time exploring the internal political manoeuvres within the hegemony. In fact, these sections take up very large parts of this novel and we are introduced to a lot more characters. Anyone who is hoping for a sequel that solely follows the pilgrims and their journey is going to be a little bit disappointed. Being really honest, to start with, I kind of was, but then I got really hooked by all the other aspects and it just totally didn't matter anymore. The novel also takes a much deeper look at artificial intelligence within the galaxy, this thing called the Techno Core, and all the hidden agendas that are within it. These aspects link very closely to the detective story from the first novel. Just like the first novel, we are exploring really complex themes around the ideas of free will, destiny, faith, and the nature of godhood. And the influence of John Keats within this novel is still there. Much more in this novel in kind of character form as opposed to sort of influential thematic ways, but it's still there. John Keats is still pulsing throughout this story. And as far as the plot is concerned, we still get loads of twists and turns throughout, even more than the first novel, I would say. As the characters get more complex, their journeys continue, and the world building gets bigger. And yes, the stakes are high, and people die. So what did I like, and what didn't I like? What I liked. I really loved the storytelling in this one. It is complex, but Simmons does an effortless job of weaving these multiple narratives, these different threads together and enabling them to build and grow whilst also taking time for us to think philosophically about the ideas each character presents us. Yeah, again, it's complex and it is woven together beautifully. Now, as much as we don't get the individual stories that made the first novel so utterly unique, what I absolutely love about this novel is it doesn't slack on the emotional development, the character development. They're rich, they're complex, they build throughout, and we might not spend as much time with them as we did in the first novel, but he doesn't drop the ball with that element. I just felt really connected to these characters emotionally all the way through. I love that this novel raises these profound questions around existence, technology, and the sort of future of humanity, especially when it comes to AI. Even though this was written in 1990, with what's happening right now with artificial intelligence, yeah, it just really made me stop and think. I also think Dan Simmons has done a fantastic job of building upon the world he created in the first novel. I think when it comes to sort of sci-fi or fantasy, what we want from a good sequel is the ability to build and expand the world you've created without breaking or buckling the rules that you set in place in the first novel. And Simmons has just done a fantastic job. It's a lot more political novel. We get a lot more of a better sense of the world and the kind of the politics of the world, especially the stuff with the impending war and how that's building and the decisions that the higher ups are having to make. At the start, I was a bit like, why are we spending time on these moments and not with our pilgrims? But it just, if you stick with it, it just slowly expands upon this world. As said, it's a much more traditional sci-fi novel compared to the first, but it does what good sci-fi sequels should do, and it does it really, really well. Just like the first novel, the prose and the writing quality is excellent throughout. Dan Simmons is just a fantastic writer. I've already talked about the sort of the balance of the complexity of the storyline at play, but it is all so effortlessly brought together with just this really wonderful prose. It's not flashy, but it's just detailed enough to bring things to life. Again, it's well balanced. Yeah, it's just really good. And the final thing I absolutely love about this novel is it concludes things. The first novel opens up all of these questions, plot threads left unanswered. That first novel is so open-ended. And this novel, it continues that journey and it concludes it. Now, of course, there are some things that have been left a little bit open. There are another 2 novels in this series, although I have been told that the first 2 books are linked together and the second 2 books are linked together. And for the most part, you can stop at this novel. You can finish at this novel and be really, really content with where we end up. The journey of the pilgrims concludes and we get all of our answers, or like 98% of the answers, and I had a real fear that it was going to do the same thing the first novel did, and it didn't. It finishes, it concludes. Thank you, Dan Simmons. What didn't I like? Now, I don't actually have any negatives when it comes to this book. The story, the characters, the development, the world building, I thought they were all first class, all absolutely excellent. However, this is a sequel to a book that I think could be my favourite sci-fi ever written, so whether I like it or not, I'm going to be comparing it to the first one. Now, what made the first novel so unique is that we get these individual short stories from each of the pilgrims, and what made it absolutely incredible science fiction to me is that each story we follow feels like it could have been written by a different author. That's how good it is, that's how interesting it is, and that's how constantly it shifts in tone and style. That shifting in tone and style that made the first novel so incredible just doesn't exist in this novel. Now, of course it wouldn't, because we wouldn't want Dan Simmons to do the same thing again, and considering those are stories being shared, we are constantly spending our time in that first novel in the past, and in this novel we are very much in the present following these characters. So I wouldn't expect this novel to do the same thing, but it does suffer from just not being able to live up to how unique that first novel was. So therefore, unfortunately, it just doesn't quite hit the heights of Hyperion. But that doesn't mean to say this isn't an excellent book. The Fall of Hyperion is a complex and richly detailed continuation of Dan Simmons' first novel. It offers a deep and thought-provoking narrative all the way through, offering profound and philosophical questions about life and technology that really made me think. It also effortlessly continues the world building of the first novel and actually builds upon the strengths of the first novel, presenting us with new challenges and new questions. And I just thought, as far as sequels go, it did a damn good job. It did a really good job. And of course, it's not going to live up to the first novel. The first novel is a masterpiece. But as far as sequels go, and as far as continuations of a story go, I've seen sci-fi and fantasy really drop the ball on the sequel. And I'm really thankful to say that The Fall of Hyperion doesn't do that. I'm going to give The Fall of Hyperion 4.5 stars out of 5. I thought it was excellent and in some moments fantastic. It does all the things that I would want a sequel to do. Of course, it pales in comparison to the first one. The first one was so unique. The first one just did something really different and it was so thematically rich. This one is much more of a traditional science fiction novel, so definitely more for the science fiction fans out there. But yeah, it does everything I wanted it to do and more. Have you read this book? And if so, what did you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Please let me know in the comments below. And as always, I hope you're well. I hope you're enjoying whatever you might be reading, and I'll see you all on the next one.